What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I have this idea. I have a theory. I know that, the whole thing with Kamala Khan isn't the most popular thing ever, but bear with me here because I think Kamala Khan is going to end up being more powerful than Carol Danvers, or at least really, really close to it. Not only that, I think I found the connection, or at least I have an idea on the connection between Carol Danvers and Kamala Khan and the 10 Rings of Shang-Chi. I don't really know exactly how it is that Monica Rambeau fits into this, but I think it all goes back to the Kree, and I think it is pointing in the direction of the Inhumans, or at the very least, some baseline introduction of their existence. So, for the most part, we know about the 10 Rings. We know pretty much everything about them with the exception of two things. One is their origin, which we'll cover or we'll talk about here. And the second is where they're sending a signal to, which is something we speculated in the past, as Kane the Conqueror, things like that. Honestly, everybody's just kind of spitballing and guessing at this point. And then we already know what's going on with Carol Danvers and all that kind of good stuff. So let's talk about what's going on with the bracelets of Kamala Khan. Now, the big theory going on out there is that they're likely the quantum bands or the negabands, which kind of makes sense. I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe is actually just merging the two bands together, which I think also makes sense because functionally, the quantum bands and negabands are basically the same thing, right? They pretty much do the same thing. The big differentiation between these two things is really how they're powered more so than how they're used. And so when it comes to these things, the difference between the quantum bands and the negabands is that the quantum bands are powered by the quantum zone. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what that means, the quantum zone is kind of like the wellspring of all energy and existence in Marvel Comics. At least it was for a little while. Marvel has all kinds of answers as to how it is that everything came into existence, right? You go back and you read the old Roy Thomas stories. It's this explanation that, the one above all created everything, and then you read Al Ewing's Ultimates, and it was the first universe that was created by the one above all. And then when the first universe was destroyed, or at least fractured into an infinite number of pieces during the Celestial Holy War, then that gave us the first multiverse. And then if you read Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars from 2015, the current iteration of the multiverse is basically made up of the energy of the Molecule Man Owen Reese, and it was shaped by Franklin Richards, and then its form and function had basically been memorized by Reed Richards over the course of his life, and that's where the multiverse comes from now. There's all kinds of different answers there, right? But in effect, the quantum bands essentially use life force in order to keep themselves powered, and a person who uses it can manipulate all forms of energy depending on who's using it. They can make themselves invulnerable. There's a lot of different possibilities there. On the other side, the negabands are actually powered by the negative zone, i.e. antimatter energy, but at the end of the day, they all still pretty much do the same thing. So it makes the most sense that in order to simply simplify things, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is just she's got cosmic bands, and that's it. And they can call them whatever they want to, the quantum bands, the negabands, what have you. Now, here's where things come into play. The energy in terms of as it was being emanated between the quantum bands or whatever bands it is that Kamala Khan has, looks almost identical to the energy as it was being emanated by Shang-Chi as well as Carol Danvers. And the reason why I say that, especially when it comes to the 10 Rings, because one thing to remember is that the bands let off two different types of colors. There was one color that it was letting off when Shang-Chi's father was using it. Then there was a different color when Shang-Chi was using it, meaning that it can kind of use both colors as it wants to. That was most likely designed to illustrate the difference in terms of their alignment to good or evil, or selfishness versus altruism, or whatever. But in effect, you merge those two colors together, emanating from the rings at the same time. It looks almost exactly like the same power that Kamala Khan was showing in the trailer, as well as the power that Carol Danvers lets off. Now, Carol Danvers is sort of the weird piece here, because remember, she gained her powers when the Lightspeed engine had basically exploded, and then just bombarded her with all kinds of energy, and that engine was powered by the Tesseract, so she's kind of a walking, talking space stone, more or less. But she is able to do some pretty incredible things. What I think we're looking at when it comes to the 10 Rings and Kamala Khan is we're looking at a form of technology that was previously used by the Kree and then ultimately abandoned. Because remember, during that post-credit scene in Shang-Chi, that Carol Danvers says it's not any form of technology that I've ever seen, right? But she hasn't seen every form of technology ever. And there is room here to make the argument that the Kree ignored it, right? The Kree just basically got rid of it. A really good example of this is in Fantastic Four number 6 by Jonathan Hickman. Really, it's called FF number 6 by Jonathan Hickman. But basically what you ended up learning was essentially the origin or the history of the Inhuman Project, right? The idea of the Kree is that what they wanted to do was genetically modify individuals so they could slip into other societies, the Chameleons, the Badoons, all those different guys, and then basically create civil war, right? Create social and political discord to make it easy for the Kree to conquer them. What ended up happening is that when the Inhuman Project was in full swing and the results of the project were presented to the Supreme Intelligence, because the Supreme Intelligence is in a kind of amalgamation of all the greatest minds to ever exist in the Kree Empire, the religious side of those minds basically created, or at least introduced, a kind of prophecy that somewhere along the line a Midnight King would rise that would lead to their downfall. That Midnight King, of course, being Black Bolt of the Inhumans. The result of this is that the Kree cast aside the Inhuman Project. They basically deleted all information, and the Supreme Intelligence had the Accuser Corps kill everybody who knew anything about it. Like, they literally clean slated it, and it was effectively wiped away. Now, ultimately, there were a handful of the Inhuman tribes that succeeded, and that's where you get the War of the Four Cities from Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four. The name is awesome. The story's every bit as awesome as you think it is. There's one point where Black Bolt has like 5 wives. It's kind of nuts. But regardless, it's not outside the realm of possibility that at some point along the line, assuming this Kree-Skrull war has been going on long enough, or for their own personal curiosity, the Kree had discovered the ability to tap into the quantum realm. I have a hard time believing that Hank Pym, some guy on Earth, was the first person in the cosmos to ever figure out that exists, especially when you're talking about a race like the Kree, which by the time Hank Pym was any measurable scientist, had long since achieved interstellar travel. They had to have been able to figure that out somewhere along the line, especially when you talk about how their political and religious leader, the Supreme Intelligence, is basically a supercomputer. Like, it would have figured something like that out a while ago. So my thought is the Supreme Intelligence learned about the quantum realm, realized it was a source of what's basically infinite energy, and then started weaponizing it. The war between the Kree and the Skrull waged on. It eventually came close to Earth, or perhaps it had something to do with the creation of the Inhumans, and ultimately, for whatever reason that's not explained, the bracelets that are now being used by Kamala Khan and the 10 rings that were found in Shang-Chi basically ended up on Earth, right? They ended up staying here. Perhaps it's one of those things where that kind of energy or that power was being used by the Kree to try to wipe out the Inhumans on Earth, and in turn, the Inhumans somehow managed to succeed. We don't really know, right? It's one of those weird things too, because when they talk about the idea of the beacon sending out a signal, that of course it could be sending a signal to Attilan, which nobody knows about. It's the Inhuman royal city on Earth. Now, there are some major flaws here, right? Like, one, how could it possibly be the Sorcerer Supreme has no idea that there is a hidden city on Earth? The second is, how could Carol Danvers have no idea how could anybody not know that's the case at this point, right? Like, the Earth has been explored about as well as it can be. But you can also tie this into like the X-Men theory, which is going on right now, that the X-Men do exist, and that Xavier had basically wiped the world's minds of the X-Men's existence. So there is room to create that kind of argument there. The other part of this, though, is how do you tie this in to someone like Carol Danvers, who somehow has no idea this technology ever existed? We know the Supreme Intelligence is seemingly still around, and if that information was wiped, there'd be no reason for her to ask about it, because she would never have a motivation to. She would never even knew it existed in the first place, especially if it was really more of like an experiment or a project that was being worked on by the Kree and was ultimately abandoned due to the potential danger of it, or some kind of weird prophecy that like it would ultimately come to an end. Another big problem that you have here is, how do you roll in Monica Rambeau into all this, right? That if Carol Danvers and Kamala Khan and the 10 rings are all basically a result of Kree technology being used to harness the ability to alter or use other sources of energy out there, is it one of those where basically, Monica Rambeau kind of falls into that same community or that same group? It's just that her power is a result of WandaVision more so than anything else. I imagine a lot of this will probably be answered in Marvels, but just looking at the bracelets of Kamala Khan, they bear a striking resemblance in terms of like design and appearance to the 10 rings of the Mandarin. They don't look exactly alike, but they look pretty similar, right? They look like they're cut from the same cloth, so to speak. So I think that's entirely possible here, that what we're looking at is some long abandoned form of technology that allows individuals to tap into other sources of energy, right? It explains why it is that the energy let off by the 10 rings and the energy let off by the quantum bands looks very similar to the energy from the quantum realm itself in terms of like how it physically manifests. There's a lot of possibilities here, but that's my thought on this, right? I wanted to run this by you guys, see what you guys think. Let me know down in the comments. I mean, I know I can always count on you guys to poke holes in my theories. You guys are nothing if not consistent when it comes to that. My poor little feelings. But no, poke all kinds of holes in this, right? I mean, I'm really fascinated. Like, I love the idea of it being the quantum bands and or the negabands, because that means we're going full on into like Marvel Cosmic, right? I think it'd be really kind of weird if Kamala Khan basically became the new Quasar, but it makes sense if Phyla-Vell could do it, so could she. Phyla-Vell, by the way, ridiculously amazing character. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Let me know what you all think down in the comments section. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.